Alas, my love, you do me wrong to cast me off discourteously, and I have loved you for so long, delighting in your company. Green sleeves was all my joy, green sleeves was my delight. Green sleeves was my heart of gold, and who but my lady? Green sleeves.
Yes, Green Sleeves was my heart of gold. Green Sleeves started a whole hell of a mess in England. Welcome to History of England, episode 30. I call this For Want of a Nail. Now, last time, we looked at some of the various affairs Henry VIII had. One of them with Elizabeth Blount, resulting in a bastard son named Henry Fitzroy, and then with Mary Boleyn, and finally her sister, Anne Boleyn. And we talked about how Henry and Anne fell deep in love, and Henry became convinced that he needed to get out of his marriage with Catherine Aragon because he was living in sin. And the various steps he took, tried to get his matter accomplished, only was blocked again and again by Rome. Now this pushed him further from Rome and further from Wolsey. He was unable to do anything to get this matter accomplished. I looked at some of the tiny little invasions of France that Henry ordered, which failed, and finally I looked at the rise of new men, Thomas More, Thomas Cromwell, and Thomas Cranmer, and finally looked at the fall of Wolsey. Now, Henry VIII was angry that Rome did not do what he wanted them to do, so he decided he'd take his anger out on what and who he could. Now for him, this meant heading back to protect Englishmen from the errors of English papists. So in September of 1530, he claimed 14 senior clerics, among them 8 bishops and 3 abbots, were guilty of colliding with Wolsey in his role as papal legate. And days after Wolsey died, Henry had the same charge filed against all the clergy of England, along with charges of administering Roman law in the ecclesiastical courts, which of course they had been doing for centuries. And Henry also called Parliament to meet in early 1531. And he transferred the annual convocation of the clergy from St. Paul's to Westminster, because there he could control it. Now Henry let it be known he would graciously accept a large bribe to dismiss the charges against the clergy. The Provence of Canterbury collected £100,000 and offered it along with some conditions. Now, one condition was they wanted to know exactly what they had done wrong, so they did not do it again. And the second was they demanded that the church itself be confirmed and all its ancient privileges laid out in Magna Carta. Henry was furious with these demands, and he went on the attack. In February 1531, he sent 5 articles to be added to the proposed bribe. The first called for the convocation to recognize Henry, the sole protector and supreme head of the English church and the clergy. The second stated he was the only one who truly cured souls in England, not the Bishop of Rome. And the other 3 were pretty much along the same vein, and really no king had ever posed such sweeping powers or presumed so much. The clergy was anxious about all this. See, they had not read the books Henry read, so his assumption of sovereignty of the church was an extraordinary, unthinkable innovation. He was wishing to replace the papacy that had governed the church for more than 1,000 years. He was wishing to do this, and how dare he say he was the one who cured souls? That's a duty of ordained priests, and Henry was not an ordained priest. Now they knew this had some connection with the king's wish to divorce Catherine Aragon, but they knew nothing other than the fact that England was divided on this great matter. The members of the convocation began an anxious debate among themselves. They were torn between the duties of Clement VII and the loyalty to Henry VIII. They knew They dared not incur the wrath of Henry on themselves, but John Fisher, Bishop of Rochester, had already spoken out in favor of Catherine and Aragon. Fisher was under extreme pressure. A gun had been fired at his palace beside the Thames, and the shots seemed to come from the house of the Earl of Wiltshire, yet another new title for the father of Anne Boleyn. And then there came the great porridge incident. His cook had made a pot of porridge for his household, but Fisher had not been hungry, so he had not eaten any. One servant and another poor woman fed out of charity died after eating the porridge, and others became extremely sick. The cook confessed he had poisoned the laxatives as a prank that had misfired. King Henry VIII was extremely furious. He demanded that Parliament pass an act that murder by poison was treason and should be punished by the culprit being boiled alive. And the poor cook was taken to Smithfield and indeed boiled alive. Actually, I think that deserves another one. There you go. Anyway, some at court whispered that Anne Boleyn, or one of her faction, had put the cook up to the act, which is why Henry had acted so quickly to move suspicions. We will never know the truth, of course. It boiled up with the cook. Meanwhile, the King's Privy Council was divided on the full consequences of Henry's demands on the convocation. The radical faction, led by the Boleyns, wished to press forward quickly. If the king was truly head of the Church of England, the opinion of Clement VII meant nothing. The marriage of between Henry and Anne could take place, therefore. The conservatives in the council feared that if they moved too far to the left, the papacy would place an interdict on England, which would bring a war with Spain and disrupt the trade with Europe. The king really was not clear about the strategy. He was slowly testing the ground with every move he made, sometimes to the right, sometimes to the left. But there was much debate and some meetings between Henry VIII and William Warham, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and it was decided that Henry was to be supreme head of the Church of England, as far as the law of Christ allowed. This proposal was put to the convocation. There was silence, at which point Warham announced that whoever was silent consented to the agreement, and at which point someone else shouted, "All are going to be silent, therefore," and the agreement was made. It was a defining moment of the English Reformation, and began the schism that has yet to be healed between Rome and the English crown. And I think it's important to note at this juncture, Henry had not decided to supplement the papacy. He was wishing simply to issue a warning to Rome that in the future, the clergy of England would be on his side. If they dare defy him, well, there are means of dealing with that. Boiling alive comes to the forefront of that. Anyway, and also, now that he'd been granted the money from the clergy, he seemed disinclined to pursue the matter at this point. By that spring, 1531, Henry had withdrawn deeper into the palace of Whitehall, or sometimes he went to Hampton Court, where he had seized from Wolsey at his downfall. Both places, however, he kept to the so-called Privy Chamber and his suite of rooms. He no longer saw Catherine, and this agony affected their daughter, Princess Mary, who that spring fell sick with a stomach disorder. Catherine asked permission to visit Mary, and Henry ordered her to go, and "Please, stay away. Stay with her permanently," he said. In late May, the Privy Council also sent a delegation to her asking that she agree to divorce, but again she said, "Hell no," in so many words. That July, Henry officially denounced Catherine of Aragon, ordering her to go to Windsor and stay there. Now, she sent a letter to him, and he angrily replied that because of her, she had subjected him to the indignity of a citation to Rome, and she had turned out all advice given to her. He warned her, "Do not send me another letter." She was then sent to the Moor, which is a large house in Hertfordshire that once belonged to Wolsey. I think he owned every house in England, pretty much. And then she was sent to Ampthill Castle in Bedfordshire. And wherever she went, a large court stayed with her. And she still was seen as the leader of the conservative faction of the Privy Council, even though she really wasn't doing much leadership. In fact, she's spending her days rising at midnight, attending Mass, fasting and confessing twice a week, and then reading devotionals until she fell asleep. That winter, a sign of the popular mood emerged in England when Anne Boleyn went out to dine at a friend's house along the Thames River. A mob of 8,000 women, or maybe man dressed as women, descended on the house with the intention of seizing her. Luckily, she received word what was happening and escaped before they arrived. Henry ordered the matter hushed up, but it spread anyway. Anne is being called the whore, and the abbot of Witterbury was arrested and tried for calling her this from his pulpit. Every parish in the Kingdom of England was divided on the king's great matter now. The winter of 1531-1532, a young woman named Elizabeth Barton, a young servant from Kent, working in the household of a steward for the Archbishop of Canterbury, started to fall into clairvoyant trances and announced she was told the future of England by the Virgin Mary. She wrote a book of oracles and she sent it to Henry, who refused to take it seriously. He did agree 3 times to meet with her, and then said, well, she's harmless. But that changed when she started to gather a small following of priests and friars around her, who began to announce her message from pulpits and market squares. She stated that if Henry married Anne Boleyn, he would reign only 1 month and then die like Richard III. So Henry decided to back away from Anne when he heard this, because he also heard a sermon from a Franciscan friar who stated that if he did marry Anne, he would end up like King Ahab of the Bible, whose blood was licked up by dogs. For that crime of imagining the death of the king, the friar was banished from the Kingdom of England. Now, against this background of unrest, Henry called Parliament to meet in the spring of 1532. Henry, once again, changed his mind and decided to continue attacking Clement VII. He had Parliament introduce an act that cancelled the payments made to Rome by newly elected bishops and archbishops, and then had the act delayed for 1 year, again as a warning to Clement. The faction in the House of Lords, led by Fisher, were deeply concerned by what Henry was doing, but they kept quiet. They were in the minority. And then the House of Commons presented to Henry a long petition concerning its grievances against the church, in particular asking why the church was allowed to pass legislation and convocations. Petition complained about the ecclesiastical courts, the trials of heretics, and the size of the ecclesiastical fees. In April, Henry sent this petition to William Warham, who had already called the yearly convocation, and demanded an answer be swiftly given to these charges. Next week, he received a reply that the clergy denied all the charges against him and asserted that their power of legislation came from the Bible. So the king summoned the House of Commons before him. He told them what the convocation had said, silently agreeing this would lead to a war between the Commons and the convocation, but hey, he wouldn't have started, it was the House of Commons who did it. And the convocation, knowing that they had really not pleased the king or Parliament, proposed that while Henry was alive, they would not introduce legislation in matters unconnected with faith. But of course, this does not resolve anything. On May 11th, 1532, Henry called a delegation from the convocation to see him and told them that he was angry that they were divided in their loyalty to him because they still listened to the papacy. So Henry issued a series of demands to the convocation. Among these demands is that no new canons, church laws, were to be proposed or enacted without royal license, that all existing ecclesiastical laws were to be reviewed by a panel of 16 clergy and 16 members of the House of Commons, and that a majority verdict would be upheld by Henry, who would abolish that law. So for 5 days, the convocation debated this. And then on May 16th, Henry, impatient, demanded an answer. So the convocation held a vote, and by 1 nay vote, everyone else saying yay, they agreed with everything Henry had said, and this answer became known as a submission of the clergy. Why this occurred has yet to be seen, has been seen as yet another move in the Reformation of England. After all, a truly independent nation state like England can never have emerged without a radical separation from the authority of Rome, but I think it's more like an absolute monarch needing absolute rule over all subjects, laity, and clergy. So you can take your pick. The day after the submission of the clergy, Thomas More was forced to resign as Lord Chancellor because he had become known as a supporter of the rights of the old church, as controlled by Rome, so he had to go. Another man who had resisted the will of Henry was, of course, John Fisher, who in secret was talking to the Spanish ambassador, suggesting that Spain invade England and, in a coup d'etat, throw Henry off the throne. A third man was Archbishop of Canterbury William Wilhelm, who dictated to his scribe a testament denouncing the laws of and against the church, and then had the good sense and fortune to die, so he could not be touched by the crown. But all the other bishops agreed with Henry, some out of loyalty, some out of fear, some loyalty and fear. Henry had been using the cover of Parliament every step he took. He lent at least 3 times the Parliament in order to sway the vote. So he could not be sure how England would take the great changes he had in mind, so he tried to make it seem that the House of Commons were the leaders. He simply had to agree, but of course he was the one who was really guiding the anti-clerical legislation. That during this period, the House of Commons found a voice it had lacked before. It became now a sort of partner to the crown, helping to make Henry a sort of king in Parliament that would wield supreme authority in a new united nation. Now, meanwhile, in September 1532, King Henry VIII gave Anne Boleyn a hereditary peerage, making her Marquise of Pembroke, the first woman honored this way in England. He also gave her a present of a mantle of crimson velvet, a golden coronet, and much of Catherine Aragon's jewels, despite Catherine's protest. But when Henry took Anne on a procession through the southern counties, the response of the people were sullen and hostile. Henry had also taken a looking closely at the faces of everyone in court to decide where they stood with Anne so they would give her proper respect. Then Henry had the official printer print a number of tracts supporting his side in the great matter, and he even wrote many of these tracts. All of them defended Henry's decision to separate from Catherine Aragon because the Bible said he should, but they also include private details of Catherine's wedding night with Prince Arthur. Henry then took another step. He took Anne with him on a state visit to France. He had come to a public break with Charles V, so he needed to court Francois I and keep that alliance strong. But he heard that the king's sister and other ladies of the court would refuse to meet with Anne, and his own sister, Mary Tudor, refused to go to the royal party to France. So Anne was forced to stay in Calais. Henry went on to Boulogne to meet with Francois. Then once they came back to Calais, they were held up by violent storms, so they could not cross the English Channel for 2 weeks. When they finally arrived back in Canterbury, they were confronted by Elizabeth Barton, who once more lectured them on their transgressions and prophesied calamity. But Henry could not change his mind anymore, because by this time, or at least shortly afterwards, he finally slept with Anne. Because she was pregnant by early December, so it has to be around this time. The couple had decided to marry officially. Reports were spread that a secret wedding had actually occurred as soon as he came back from England, with only Anne's family attending. This may not have occurred, but it is certain that before he slept with Anne, he would have done something to make the match official to avoid this child being born a bastard. He couldn't have that. Now, officially, at sunrise on January 25th, 1533, Henry and Anne were married by the King's chaplain in the high chamber above the recently built Holbein Gate at Whitehall Palace. 3 members, at least, of the Privy Council were present as witnesses. And soon afterwards, the preachers of the court started to pray for Queen Anne. Catherine was stripped of that title. She was ordered to stop using it. And indeed, by February, everyone in the courts could see that Anne was pregnant, and then for the first time in a long time, she was seen laughing in public. Now, by this time, it was clear that England and Rome were broken. A parliament again was called to meet in February 1533. Of course, as usual, the parliament would pass minor acts. Shoe leather, how important is that? And the price of goods, and killing crows, and killing ravens, and how about paving this road between the Strand and Charing Cross? Only then did they move to other more important matters. They passed the Act in Restraint of Appeals, declaring that from now on, all church cases will be decided in England by King Henry and the Archbishop of Canterbury, with no appeals being allowed to go to Rome. This act destroyed the polity of the Middle Ages. Now, it's been suggested that Thomas Cromwell was the minister who oversaw and devised these constitutional changes, but there are many cooks in the kitchen. Among these cooks was Thomas Cranmer, of course, but there's also lawyers in Parliament willing to help draft legislation. Many of them had been opposed to the powers of the church courts and had constantly favored common law over canon law because they were common law lawyers. Another consequence they quickly discovered was that if canon law was subordinate to common law, it meant it was subordinate to the king. So it was becoming clear that the king was head of the church in England, and thus they began to discuss ways to make this official. Now, as I said, William Warham had died. So Henry had chosen Thomas Cranmer to become the new Archbishop of Canterbury, but it was still deemed necessary that he received this authority from Rome, as it's clear that if Cranmer was to be obeyed and declared legitimate, the See of Peter had to give consent. And so in order to get this consent, Henry ordered that the Act in Restraint of Appeals be delayed before he gave his royal assent, just as he had withheld seizing the annates destined for Rome. See, Clement VII looked at this and said, well, Henry's still a loyal son of the church. He had to deal with this disobedient, anti-ecclesiastical House of Commons. And hide his true intent, Henry even invited the papal nuncio to go with him when he visited Parliament. So Clement VII, believing what his eyes saw, now his ears heard, issued a papal bull that confirmed Cranmer the new Archbishop of Canterbury. Cranmer then swore his formal oath to Rome as legate to the Holy See, but he made it clear that he was going to fulfill his obligations to God and Henry, not God and Rome. In late March, he was consecrated, and it was time now for another step. The clergy, meeting again in the annual convocation, I know this happens all the time here, convocation, Parliament, spring. Anyway, the clergy in the annual convocation declared the marriage between Catherine of Aragon and Henry VIII had been invalid, and out of the 216 clergy present, only 19 voted nay to this action. The axe had truly fallen on the neck of the church. Shortly afterwards, John Fisher was placed under house arrest. On May 23rd, at an ecclesiastical court meeting in Dunstable, Thomas Cranmer issued a decree stating that the marriage between Henry and Anne was lawful. The Archbishop had written a letter to Thomas Cromwell before making the statement, pleading that the meeting of the court be kept top secret. He did not want to risk Catherine of Aragon attending. The Bishop of London, who was attending the court, was so vexed at this decree that he argued with Cranmer. Cranmer told him, "Shut up, or you'll be arrested and either burnt alive or boiled in the cauldron of lead, depending on how I'm feeling when I sign the death warrant." The Bishop of London shut up. One man he did not was Clement VII, who sent a letter to Cranmer telling him how displeased he was that he had been chosen archbishop and promising that he would no longer stand still and do nothing. But he's in Rome, and Cranmer is in England. Anyway, on May 31st, 1533, Anne Boleyn was carried from the Tower of London to Westminster Palace in a white chariot while the citizens of London turned out in the best clothes. Mystery plays were performed on special stages as she passed. The fountains of London poured forth wine. The next day she was taken to Westminster Abbey, where she was crowned Queen of England by Cranmer. But the people were not so pleased with their new queen. While she was coming into the city, constables from every parish were forced to stand on guard in case the people decided to riot. They didn't, but in the end they were really still silent and hostile. They'd come out of curiosity, maybe, and not really respect. It's true that power may be glorious, but it quickly became fear, something that Anne Boleyn would experience sooner rather than later. A group of counselors, meanwhile, visited Catherine Aragon and informed her she was to be titled Princess Dowager, not Queen. They told her that Henry had married again and took the copy of the statement that the counselors had brought her, and she read it and then slashed out the title of Princess Dowager. Henry heard this. He reduced the size of her household and ordered that if anyone in England was heard calling Catherine Queen from now on throughout England, they would be stripped, beaten, and had their ears nailed to a wooden post. And now that Henry had married Anne, he was ready to move against Elizabeth Barton. December of 1533, Henry, Cranmer, and Cromwell met to investigate the claims and behavior of Barton. Barton was questioned and confessed that she had been wrong. She was charged with high treason for prophesying the doom of the Tudors and was taken to the Tower of London for further questioning. There, she was tortured on the rack, and she confessed that all her visions and revelations had been lies. This signed confession was announced at the court of the Star Chamber. It was decided that Barton would be taken throughout the Kingdom of England, and at every stop she would confess her fraud. In early 1534, she was officially charged with treason by Parliament, dragged through the streets from the Tower to Tyburn, and there she was beheaded. It was now clear that anyone who opposed Henry would face the same fate. And by this time, those who had met King Henry VIII saw he was happy. He had won a victory against Rome. He was head of the church. He was King of England. He spent his time having a new cockpit built at the palace at Whitehall. He was announcing to everyone he met that Queen Anne was pregnant and she would have a male heir, and his dynasty would be secure for yet another generation. But in private, he had gone back to roving. It is not known who he was having an affair with, but we have notes from the Imperial ambassador that the woman is extremely pretty, and that many nobles were helping Henry hide the affair because they wanted to humiliate Anne Boleyn. Anne, however, found out about the affair. She confronted Henry and using some very foul language, it said, and his temper flared, and he told her to shut up. He'd raised her to his height, to her present height, and he could dash her again to the ground at will, just as he had done to Wolsey. But the storm passed, for Anne did have the future inside her. The astrologers and doctors of the court stated that his son would be born, and Henry announced the new prince was going to be named either Henry or Edward. And on September 7th, 1533, Anne gave birth to a daughter named Elizabeth, after Henry's late mother, Elizabeth of York. Henry stated he was disappointed, but he was hopeful that a son would follow. He ordered that Princess Mary, now 17 years old, would be stripped of her title, and from now on was to be simply called Lady Mary, the daughter of the king. The infant Elizabeth was taken to Hatfield House in Hertfordshire in December 1533, and there a court was established for her, and Mary was ordered to join the court as Princess Elizabeth's servant. But all is not well in the royal family. A daughter had been born, not a son. The king had turned his attention to yet another lover, showing Anne that her position was not that secure, and she started to fear. And she started to become more quiet, and she started to withdraw. She feared the eyes and ears of the court, for she knew she was not popular, and there were those waiting to claw her down as soon as they could. So next time, we will continue to look, at the Reformation in the English Church, and examine the fate of Anne. So stay tuned.
I have been both life and land, your love and goodwill for to have. Green sleep was all my joy, green sleeves was my delight. Green sleeves was my heart of gold, and who but my lady Green Sleeves?